Hey guys, my name is Coach Stidom. Super excited to be with you today. When Butler asked me to come and talk, I had to say yes, and just excited to get to share a little bit about myself. I know a lot of you might not know me. I am the head varsity basketball coach here in my second year at Front Range. You could also know me as the husband of the self-proclaimed favorite teacher at Front Range, Miss D or Mrs. Stidom, whatever you call her nowadays. So that's kind of my claim to fame here. But regardless, I'm super excited to talk to you today, talk to you a little bit about my story, how I ended up at Front Range twice, and just kind of the process it took to get here. It was not easy. It was very challenging at times. I wrestled with a lot, and I'll just kind of give you some oversight into that, background into that, and kind of what makes me go, what makes me tick, what makes me who I am. And I'm just excited to share. Let me start with some prayer, and then we'll get going. God, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for Front Range, what it stands for, the mission of it. And I'm just excited to get to share a little bit about my story, and hope that it encourages somebody. And looking forward to the rest of the year. Help us to continue to grow in you and make impact wherever we go. And we pray. Amen. Cool. So what I wanted to talk about today, I was thinking about what would be beneficial for you guys to hear. What is something that I could say that could encourage you regardless of where you're at in life, regardless of where your journey is or what stage of life you're in. And I thought about my story. I think one of the most powerful things you can share with somebody is your story, because regardless of the stage of life, regardless of where you're at, your story can have an impact on somebody regardless of what you think. So I'll give you a little oversight of my story, my journey, and how I got here. I actually came to Front Range in May of 2018, and I came as the basketball coach then. I was here for about 3 months before, in July of that same year, my grandfather back home in Kentucky, which is where I'm from, passed away in a car accident. It was a tragedy for my family. My grandfather was an integral part of my life, my family's life. He was integral in our day-to-day operations, how we operated, and it just shook everybody. So when I got that phone call in July, it shook me to my core. I immediately flew back home, attended his funeral, was at home with my family for a couple weeks. And during that time, I was wrestling with, what's the next step for me? I had just moved out to Colorado 3 months earlier and took this job at Front Range because I wanted to coach. I played basketball my entire life. I came from a coaching background my entire life, and I was super excited. We had begun workouts, open gyms, summer stuff, and then all of a sudden this tragedy happens. So when that tragedy happens, I'm sitting at home wrestling with, okay, do I go back to Colorado? Do I stay home? Whatever that looked like. My parents were moving my grandma from Kentucky to Indiana to live with them, and there was just a lot of struggle going on. So I just prayed about it thoroughly and was convicted and convinced that my next step was to go back home to Indiana. And that's what I did. I had a very tough conversation with Coach O at that time and let him know 3 months after taking the job I was leaving. And I struggled with it. It was a really hard conversation. I cried just because I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. But then this tragedy happened, and it just took me on a detour, I guess. It took me unexpectedly somewhere, or back to a place I thought I had left. So I go home to Indiana, move back for a year, leave Front Range behind, honestly, with never expectations of coming back. It was like a nice 3 months knowing you. I go home from Indiana. I go take an assistant coaching position at my alma mater, Taylor University, where I coached for a year. And then, the crazy thing is that whole transition happened, and then I'm there and I'm sitting there thinking, am I where I'm supposed to be again? I had Front Range on my mind. I had Colorado on my mind. It was like I moved out there in the first place with the idea, with the thought that that's where I was supposed to be. And while I was here, I loved it. I embraced my time. And then just this tragedy happened. And so I go back and I'm thinking, I still am just not at peace. I'm wrestling with where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do that entire time? And when I say wrestling, man, it was like a huge wrestle. It was nights I couldn't sleep. I had friends out here that I developed that I was reaching out to. I came and visited on a couple times just to be out here because I felt like it's where I was supposed to be. But at the same time, I feel like I'm supposed to take care of my family and help out there. So there's just a huge wrestle going on in my heart, in my soul, in my mind. And that's kind of the high level overview of where I was at that time. And then let me transition a little bit, because there's a million times in the Bible where you have these heroes or these characters that have experienced something similar. Think about Paul when he was shipwrecked. Acts 27:1 says that he set sail to Rome, Italy. He had a desire to go to Rome, and they're getting ready to set sail, and then this shipwreck happens, right? And you guys all know the story of Paul and his shipwreck. But he ends up on an island called Malta, which is not where he was planning to go. It's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to go to Rome. But while on Malta, he actually spends the winter there with those people, heals all the illnesses on the land, and actually heals the father of a high official. So while Paul had this desire to go to Rome, God actually had other plans for him on this island. Unexpected, detour. It didn't make sense, but there was a purpose to it. Same thing with Joseph, one of my favorite Bible stories. The story actually starts with Joseph being sent by his father to go check on his brothers. And what followed was Joseph actually being sold into slavery. They actually tried to kill him first. Then he gets sold to some merchants who sell him to Potiphar, who then he gets accused of trying to sleep with Potiphar's wife. Then lands in prison, forgotten about in prison. Then actually ends up second in the land. He saves his whole family's life. So my story and those stories resonate to me because while it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why things happened, I truly believe that there's purpose behind it. There's a purpose why the detours happen or the unexpected happens. We all have kind of ideas and thoughts about what we want our journey to look like. I know I did. I know when I grew up in Indiana and Kentucky, and that was my life growing up until after a couple years out of college. I was ready for something brand new. New journey, new opportunity for me out here in Colorado. Come out here, I packed my truck full of stuff and just moved on faith. And I'm out here for 3 months, had a job here at Front Range, had met friends, had found a church home, had met family that was friends that were like family to me. And then 3 months later, I have to just up and leave, put everything back in my truck and go home. It's so hard. It's hard on you mentally. It's hard on you physically, emotionally, spiritually. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And so I'm thinking that time, like, all right, I'm going back to Indiana and I'm staying. But it's also a place that I was ready to leave. So it's like, what was the purpose of my 3 months out here? And then what's the purpose of me going back? Like, those are questions that I wrestled with. So when I'm back home, I guess transition back to my story of where I was at that time. I was at Taylor coaching, and I start wrestling with, am I really about to pack up and go back to Colorado again? Like, why would I go back to the place that God just moved me from? Why would I put my family through that again? Why would I do any of that? The funny thing is, Coach O had actually texted me, man, probably around the Christmas time, just to check in, see how things were going. And they were going good. I asked how things were going with Front Range, with the basketball team. I know they had a parent step in and help coach that year. So they were at the same time going through a really hard year. And that's when I start putting in my mind, like, maybe I'm still supposed to be there. Like, maybe there's a reason that a parent stepped in and not a new coach was hired or a new coach didn't stay. Maybe there was a reason for it. And so I'm start questioning that. Those are questions I'm asking in my mind. And I'm asking personal questions too. I came out here and my grandma, who's 87 years old, okay, what if I move back and something happens to her? Are we in the same situation again? What if my family needs me? What if there's something that happens? So this whole time it's like I move out to Colorado, something crazy happens. I move back, and then I'm still wrestling. And so let me share a quick story of a Bible story of what really helped me in that transition while I was back home in Indiana, to move back out here or to take another step of faith again. The story is actually in 1 Samuel. It's 13:23 through 14:23, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. But the context is there's a battle going on. Okay, there's a battle going on between the Philistines and the Israelites. King Saul is the king right here, and his son Jonathan is actually in the middle of this battle with him, and he kind of goes off, and him and his sword bearer do their own thing. And verse 6 is a verse that really stuck out to me, and I'll give some context around it. But let me just read you this verse, because I remember, I can tell you the day and time and the exact moment where I read this verse, and it stuck out to me as I was making this decision to transition back to Colorado. So it's 1 Samuel 14, verse 6. The verse says, Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." The one line I want to read one more time is in the middle there, where it says, "Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf." And so that stuck out to me because it wasn't a certainty. There was no certainty in regard to that. They weren't going over to this outpost saying, "I know God's going to take care of us," or "I know that it's all going to be okay. I know everything's going to work out perfectly the way we have planned." And this is a battle. Like, these are people's lives at stake and a nation at stake, and people are trying to kill them. And their phrase is, "Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf." And so I start thinking, when you remove certainty from a situation and you have enough faith to act on a perhaps the Lord will act on my behalf, it's pretty cool what that does to you, because it removes certainty from a situation. Faith isn't certainty that things are going to work out the way you plan or the way you think. Faith is trusting God regardless. Faith is trusting God regardless if it works out the way you thought or not. Maybe it will work. Maybe it won't work. But God's always working. That's something that when I was making that decision, that it stuck out to me in a way that I've never heard it before. Because we all have fears of, what if this doesn't work out? And your situation and your story is going to be completely different than mine. Some of you are going to college, right? Some of you are trying to figure out, where am I supposed to go in the midst of these times? Maybe I want to go here, but that scares the crud out of me. Maybe I want to stay here, but will I be looked at this way? Some of you are just trying to figure out, whatever your situation is. It's different for each of us. But the whole point of it is, how can you act without certainty, not knowing how it works out? It's really hard. It's really scary. I can tell you that when I decided to move back here, I had to have really hard conversations with my family, and I had to have really hard conversations with myself, with the people I was working with, who expected me there longer than a year. And my reason for leaving was faith alone. I feel like I prayed about it. I've talked to wise people about it, and they've given me the best advice that I can have, which is, if you feel called and you feel like you're being obedient to what God's calling you to do, then that's all you can do, and you can trust God that entire process. So that's my story. And then what works out for me in the end is I make a move on faith alone. I had no job. I didn't even know if I was coming back to Front Range. I came back. I moved back. I had family friends that I ended up living with, and in that midst, while I'm out here, I get a job. I get to be a head coach at Front Range. I meet my wife, and I've developed lifelong friends that if I would have not made that move, none of that would have happened. God would have had a different plan in mind, or maybe a different ending for me, but because I made a move based on faith, I have a beautiful, just beginning story. And that story is just beginning. This new chapter is just beginning. But I'm hoping that what this does is it encourages you that regardless of where you're at in life, regardless of what situation you have going on, regardless of your family, your friends, or whatever decisions you're facing or struggling with or questions you're wrestling with for your own personal life. Maybe it's a goal you have Maybe it's a dream you have. Maybe it's a job you want. Maybe there's an opportunity out there that if you go for it, you're scared you might fail, or you're scared that you might be looked at a certain way, or whatever it is. I'm hoping this encourages you to go for it, to understand and pray about it, and know that if that's something that you feel called to do and it's something that you're passionate about, that it's okay to move on a maybe. It's okay to move on a perhaps God will act on your behalf. Jonathan did, and they won the battle because of that. Let me give you 3 takeaways that I take away from it, and then I'll close. Number 1, when you give up your need for certainty, you gain a true confidence and faith that is independent of circumstance. And what I mean by that is you don't let circumstances determine your faith. Your faith is independent of that circumstance. You insert the circumstance, but your faith never changes. My circumstance was, I just left Colorado. I came back home. Do I go back? That's my circumstance. But how do I not let my faith be determined by that circumstance, but my faith stands alone, my circumstance is here, and let faith dictate it? Number 2, you need a faith that is patient with mystery. And I love that term. I heard it when I was growing up, patient with mystery. Because life's mysterious, man. It's mysterious what's going to happen. You have no control. You tell us a year ago that we're all wearing masks, social distancing. I coach basketball, that my players are going to have to wear masks while playing. We're going to have no fans. All this weird stuff that we're all sick of. But how can your faith just be patient with it and grow with it? So that's number 2. And then lastly, a perhaps or maybe faith is something that we can all embrace. And what I mean by those faith, the perhaps faith or maybe faith, it's enough faith to make a move, enough faith to do it, and not know the conclusion, but trust God in the process. You're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to always make the right decision. There's going to be things you do that you question why you did it, or question if you ever should do it again. You're going to fail. It's going to happen, I promise, man. I failed. You ask all your teachers, they've all failed. They've all made mistakes. But let me encourage you to just make those moves and step out in faith, regardless of maybe how you feel or if you're scared, and trust God in the process. Because like I said before, it might work. Seriously, it might work. You might get everything you ever hoped of. It might work out perfectly. Or it might not. You might run into some strong barriers along the way that are only supposed to make you stronger, but it feels like they're trying to, destroy you and stop you. So it might work, it might not. But one thing I can promise you is that God is always working, and He's working on your behalf. He did it with Paul. He did it with Joseph. He did it in this situation with Jonathan and his people, and He'll do it for you. And so I'm very appreciative of Butler and the staff asking me to do this, and I hope that this encourages you to not be scared to fail, to trust God in the process, and hopefully gain a little perhaps faith, as I call it.
Good morning again, Front Range, and hey, welcome back to another one of our ChapelCast conversations. You just had the privilege and the pleasure to hear from a good friend of mine, and feels like an upcoming favorite at Front Range, Coach Stidom, and just some great words of wisdom, some really eloquent applications that I just, like, for me, I'm going to walk away with into the future, and will define literally how I think about things. And so I'm super excited to sit down with him, and just I know I have a couple follow-up questions that I just want to pick his brain about and hear a little bit more of his story. So we're going to jump right in. Kyle, thanks again for doing all that and for being in this place. You really are, like, you joke that your wife, formerly Miss D, is self-proclaimed favorite teacher here, and while it's probably true, dude, you really are, like, you're gaining ground on your wife, and you're dearly loved in this place. And so glad for whatever reason the Lord, your faith, brought you back to this place. I want to dig in a little bit to that idea that I love the way you put it, of the perhaps faith, right? The maybe faith. And it's so, it resonates with a lot of my story as well. And one of the things, as I think about our students and the way they hear us talk about the faith as adults who have lived a little bit more life, who have moved around, who have had life experiences that may be different from theirs, one of the things I know is in their heads, because it's been in my head before, is we talk as though, that perhaps it will and perhaps it won't. Maybe it does work out, maybe it doesn't. And then usually the stories we share from Scripture, it actually does work out, right? And so it's just not, for a lot of our students, and for a lot of my life, it's just not actually equal with reality, right? The story I think about is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they go into the fiery furnace and they say, our God will save us, but even if he doesn't. But then he does. And so I think of our students and putting them in that story, or putting them on the island of Malta, and they get shipwrecked and they never get off. Or they go into the fiery furnace and they actually get burned. And so where's the, I don't know if it's a personal story, if it's just wisdom from your life, but what do you do in that moment? Like, what is the move at that point when things actually don't work out the way that you thought they were, or for any foreseeable good at all?
I think it's, for me personally, I had to shift the perspective of which I viewed it from. Because I think that can be something that skews your viewpoint of that situation. Because to you, it works out. It works out according to your situation. I had to, in my personal story, and still to this day, I try to look at it as, maybe it worked out, I just didn't know it worked out. Because maybe there was somebody else who had to see me go through that, and that's actually the plan. Versus I thought the plan was, I was going to go somewhere, I was going to do this, I was going to do this, this was going to happen to me, I was going to meet this amount of people, or whatever it is. That was my idea of it working out. Versus maybe the whole plan along was for me to do this so that somebody could see me struggle, or somebody could see me grow, or I could interact with this person. And that was the perspective that it was supposed to be viewed from all along. So that's number one for me, is I try to shift the perspective of which I view things, because it's not all about me. But at the same time, like you can attest to this. That's really hard. I can't always view that situation from that perspective, because we're all selfishly natured, and it's like, just didn't work out. So I mean, my encouragement to our students and to whoever would be, surround yourself with people who will push you, encourage you in faith. That was really important for me, to have people who can speak truth into my life, whether I wanted to hear it or not. But also, man, view God as your dad, because he is. Pray to him, talk to him, read the Bible, man. There's stories in there that help. And I think that's biggest for me, is I was surrounding myself with people. I tried to have a different perspective of things, and I just spent time with God.
I love that. There's a Dallas Willard quote that has been hitting me a lot. That's in that same line of talking about prayer. And prayer is just talking to God about what we're doing together. And that perspective shift is so in line with what you said in the application piece of a faith that's not determined by circumstance or dictated by circumstance. And we can look at Malta, or the fiery furnace, or jail for Joseph, or the battle for Jonathan and his armor bearer, and we can say those are bad circumstances. And from one perspective, right? I wonder if Paul, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Joseph would say that. But it's this posture shift. And I think of the people that in my lowest faith moments that I envy the most, which is not already a good posture. But the people I envy the most, who I'm like, man, everything seems to be working for you. When I actually get out of my place of self pity, I actually realize, oh no, those people are actually going through a ton of negative things, right? And the reason I envy them wasn't because, if I take a step back, because of their circumstances. I actually don't want their circumstances. But actually their posture towards those is not flippant or or apathetic, but they're this place of God is walking with me always.
Yeah.
And there are things that I like better, enjoy better. There are things that hurt.
Yeah.
But those don't determine my faith,
man.
and I can actually have joy through those
Yep.
things. So I love that, man.
Yeah.
The second question I have is for you, and you have a really interesting story of coming back to the same place that you left, right? Paul is trying to get to Rome, gets shipwrecked on Malta, and he continues on to Rome, right? Joseph gets sold, and he continues to move on to a different place. For you come to Colorado, you family tragedy, you leave, and then you come back to the place that you were before, which for me takes a special kind of courage to come back and face a thing that feels like it's already failed, right? And so for you, where'd that courage come from? Where'd the courage to walk away or to turn around from a tragedy, from suffering and from pain? Where'd the courage come from to turn around from that and walk back into the thing that you believed you were called to go into? Is it people around you? Is it philosophy? Is it scripture? Like, what is it that welled that courage up in you?
It's a great question. I struggle with it to this day because I don't know. I just remember being in the moment, and again, I think it goes back to me. I was raised in a way that God is, if you feel God is calling you to something, or if you've been given a passion, or if whatever it is, that you chase that and that you pursue that, and God will walk along with you. And maybe it's the wrong move. And maybe this is my athletic background where I'm just not as like scared to fail. Because I think failure is a tool that can be used to help you grow versus a tool that's like to define you. I was scared, don't get me wrong, I was scared to fail, but I was also understanding that it could just, whatever happens, God's with me. But it doesn't really like answer where the courage came from because I was scared to death. But I had a quote on my wall that I grew up with, and it was a U.S. Navy SEAL quote, but it said, "Courage is being scared to death and doing it anyway." And that's something that I always had for sports, and it just kind of carried over. Where I was scared to death, man. I thought I didn't know if it was going to fail again, but just did it anyway. And I think I attest that a lot to the people in my life, my family, my friends who I leaned on really hard in that time for advice, for wisdom, for encouragement, for, am I crazy for doing this again? And some people say, yeah. And they were like, why would you go back? But I had this gut wrenching feeling that God wasn't finished with me there yet, for whatever reason. And there was like little signs that kept happening all over of like people reaching out, or just like little things that you can read too much into or you can't, but just kept that kind of that slow nudge I felt from God and just did it.
Yeah. It's like this. The image in my head is so often we want to see the breadcrumbs in front of us, right, leading us somewhere, and it just like doesn't work that way. It's this beautiful posture that God takes towards us in our journey. So often is He's like, no, you set the breadcrumbs. And like I'll make sure it all falls into place. But don't look for the exact right path and moment, right? And it's one of the things that in Western Christianity for sure, and I would say in our students definitely, it's one of the parts of Christianity that is so undersold. Is the work of the Spirit in us. Like the Spirit actually does, right? You talk about peace and you talk about courage, but doing it anyways, and faith and all of those things. Like there's this connection that we have as the people of God to the actual Spirit of God, and it's actually trusting that. It's actually trusting that, like when we ask the question, how do I know that's God speaking and not me? I don't know, but you have to know that God is speaking in you, And so in good faith, with those people around you, with the wisdom of the community, you walk and know, like Dallas Willard says, that God's going to be like, yeah, let's do this thing together.
Yeah.
And if you go left, I'll go left.
Yeah.
You go right, I'm going to go right.
Yeah.
You pick.
Yeah. I think you bring up a good point where I was really trying to chase the will of God, which I think is great.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept asking people, like, what if this is not God's will? And, I had really good encouragement of, God is not asking for you to make the wrong or right decision. He's just asking you to be obedient. And if you feel that you want to go here, he'll follow you and he'll walk right alongside you. It's not a wrong or right decision. That's what I kept wrestling with. Is it the right decision or is it the wrong decision? There is no right or wrong decision. It's if you feel like this is where God is calling you and you feel like this is the right decision for you at this time, then you go and God will walk right alongside with you. Yeah. And if it's the wrong decision, or if you feel like it's the wrong decision, then stay and he'll be right there with you there too. So I think you just bring up a great point that we so often struggle with right, wrong, God's will, not God's will, when God just wants to walk alongside you wherever you go, right, left, forward, up, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's more of a three-legged race, right? Like walking in step with someone and in sync with someone. Aligning our wills instead of chasing a will that isn't ours. Yeah, it's asking, how can we actually bring those two wills together as one? So good. Yeah. Well, Kyle, we are unfortunately out of time. And I get the privilege of hanging out with you elsewhere. So the rest of you don't all have that privilege. And so we're going to shut it down for today. You guys are off into your cohorts to talk about your own stories, talk about your own journeys of the unexpected popping up and your own journeys of failure and who's been there to guide you and give you wisdom along the way. And so, again, I want to thank Coach Stidom for being here. And I love you guys, and may the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, and give you peace. We'll see you in the hallway.